Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. People are trickling in from the waiting room, and we appreciate you being here for a community conversation on Livingston Loves Trees and looking at some of the work Lizzie Carroll has been working on and some of our volunteers specifically on tree health and volunteer impact report. There's been a flurry of activity for those of you that have adopted trees, and we're really excited to share what we've been up to. So to kick us off, my name is Sarah Stans. I'm the Community Resiliency Director here at Park County Environmental Council. And we are your local community conservation group with the support 350 contributing members and 4,000 folks that are local supporters regionally and across the country. We work with people in our community to find common values and work towards safeguarding the land, water, and wildlife in communities of Park County. We have a long tradition of stewardship, and we are the traditional homelands of many Indigenous people, Cheyenne, Blackfeet, Sioux, Absaloga, and many other Indigenous nations who have long stewarded this land and are deeply connected to this place. And we're really committed to finding ways to work together and continue this legacy of stewardship. And trees really fits into that as far as how we care for this place and each other and future generations. So I am not going to talk as much as there is an amount to say, and I want to leave a lot of room for Lizzie. And so I'll go through just some really high level aspects of the program, and then I'm going to hand it over to her. I'm also in control of the slides, so bear with me. So we'll do an introduction. We'll look over some of the methods of the health checks and the monitoring and some of the unique aspects of our Montana climate. In terms of we experience a lot of drought and wind and some of the species that we've been planting over the years and how well that they've been doing. We'll also talk about some things of the program that we are looking forward to, such as pruning courses, more education, and more opportunities to engage and volunteer. So just a quick introduction to Livingston Loves Trees. This program started with PCEC in 2021, and it would not have happened without the deep passion and commitment of our local community and volunteers and local tree board and all the interest to plant more trees. There's been some studies and demonstrating that there is a gap within a lot of our boulevards and some public spaces. And this includes a DNRC report and tree inventory that I'll go over here in the next couple slides. But with that, and with some threats of emerald ash borer that are coming our way in an undetermined date and time, that the time to plant trees is now, and how we look after and care for those trees becomes really important. It's easy to plant trees. Finding funding to plant trees is really easy, but their long-term care and just education and general awareness becomes the heavy lift and the engagement and part of this program that we're really focused on. So the goal of the program is to plant 1,000 trees in 10 years with a goal of about 100 trees a year. We've planted 381 trees as of May 2025, which is really exciting over the last 4 years. And our ultimate goal is to diversify our urban canopy. The photo on the left just shows when we hit a benchmark of our 300th tree this year, which was quite exciting. So the DNRC report, in summary, there's a lot of information you can find on our tree resource guide on our website that we're starting to put together and compile a lot of resources on care, but also the reason why and substantiating the program and why trees are so important to our community in Livingston specifically and across Park County eventually. So our trees have huge value. They do provide joy and beauty and biodiversity for all the critters, but they also have huge cost implications and savings with wind events and rain events. They disperse rain, they mitigate stormwater, they remove air pollutants. Right now, I'm a benefit to me being in this work. I have the luxury of being here in Missoula and listening to a testament from Lori Byron, who talked about the extreme health benefits that trees provide children and our vulnerable populations, and recommendations of providing green strips along our boulevards to kind of mitigate and filter out some of the emissions from vehicles as well as coal trains. And they really do a big job besides just because they're awesome. So what else the study says is that an inventory that was completed recently in 2024 and 2025 is that most of our trees are ash. And this is an issue because of the emerald ash borer, but also a healthy population of trees. You shouldn't have a dominating species of any one species. And these trees are, unfortunately, a majority of them are in fair, poor, dead, or dying condition. So we aim at this program to increase diversity within the species and make sure that those trees are in really good condition. I think one more point I'm going to say is that the Livingston Loves Trees program has increased that diversity with 381 trees and increasing diversity by 10% since we have about 4,000 trees in Livingston right now. Lizzie's done an awesome job and other folks and volunteers of capturing like this is where we've planted all our trees over the years. So the different color coordination just shows the dispersed efforts and where we're planting trees in different neighborhoods. A priority and strategy of the program has to make sure that we invest in areas that have been underinvested in terms of green infrastructure, such as trees and boulevards, which provide walkable, bikeable pathways to and from our homes and to everyday places, that provide shade and protection against heat and a temperature difference. And we were taking temperatures one summer when it was really hot of about 15 to 20 degrees difference. And this can be a huge impact when it's 90 or 100 degrees outside. This is just another slide to show you we work with the county and the city and the GIS. So they look at all the species in town and they update that tree inventory with our data and Livingston Loves Trees. So you can take a look here. This isn't all the species on the left. I just took a snapshot quickly to show all the species around town, and you can zoom in and zoom out. So that's another resource that we use to inform our program. So I'm going to pass this on to Lizzie. And just briefly, we thought it would be important to talk about the different methods that we used in monitoring and health checks, where monitoring is looking at the efficacy, and it was really spearheaded by Bethany and Lizzie to develop a tree monitoring program and using science to look at the different species and how well they're doing. And then on the other aspect, we engaged and started with the support of Lizzie and MCC. We wouldn't have been able to do it without her to develop a volunteer training program. So once we plant the trees, and they're also helping plant the trees, being AmeriCorps and MCC, but also in the long-term healthcare. And then this provides, training to volunteers, which she did, and she'll talk more about. And this really involves community outreach, communication, empowering our volunteers, and in general, making our community more aware of trees and improving our relationship with trees and each other. I'm going to hand it over to you, Lizzie.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Lizzie. I'm the Montana Conservation Corps Fellow with PCEC. I've been here since Tree Planting Week this May, and like Sarah said, I've been working on getting these health surveys going this summer and setting up the volunteer health check program that I'll talk about again in a minute. It's been really amazing to be able to get involved with the community more through trees, and yeah, I'm excited to talk trees with everyone today. So I'll just start by reiterating some of what Sarah was talking about with the tree monitoring surveys versus tree health check surveys. So these are two different survey methods that we used to collect the data that we're talking about today. Some of this data is coming from surveys conducted last summer, some of it's from surveys that I did this summer, and some of it's from surveys that volunteers did this summer. They all were looking for things like signs of diseases or pests, seeing how well trees are being watered and maintained, if there's any damage to the trees, and other general tree condition indicators. So the first survey method we used is what we're calling tree monitoring. So last summer, Joanna, who was PCEC's AmeriCorps Vista, conducted tree monitoring surveys on all of the trees that were planted in 2023, which is what we're calling our 1-year post-planting data. And then this summer, I conducted tree monitoring surveys on all of the trees planted in 2022 to gather what we're calling our 3-year post-planting data. These surveys looked a little different from one another, but their purpose was the same, which was to gather data on the efficacy or the success of Livingston Loves Trees as a program in terms of how well the trees were planted, the reception of outreach and education to tree adopters, and whether the species we were planting were happy and healthy in Livingston. And so based on this evaluation of Livingston Loves Trees, we can make changes to the program and adapt to meet the needs of the trees or the tree adopters that we're seeing are necessary. And again, these surveys were looking for things like indicators of pests and disease, whether the roots were exposed, if there was any physical damage to the tree, just things like that. So the other type of survey method we're talking about today is the tree health checks. This summer, a group of volunteers were trained and completed these health checks on 264 of the trees that were planted from 2023 to 2025, following a slightly different protocol from the tree monitoring surveys. They still observed each tree and assessed their condition using a checklist of health indicators, kind of like the ones we were looking for with the monitoring surveys. And then the volunteers filled out a scorecard, as seen right here on the slide, and they gave them to the adopters so they knew how their tree was doing and any threats their tree might be facing, like underwatering or a pest infestation. So the health check system was really more about assessing the condition of each tree individually and identifying any issues that might be present, and then communicating this with the adopter and really coming together to find a solution for the tree. The data that was gathered from these health checks was also informative for Livingston Loves Trees as a program in terms of changes we need to consider moving forward. So we were able to use these results as well as the results from the tree monitoring surveys to identify any trends our trees are showing and make some program level recommendations about things like future adopter outreach and education topics, adjustments to our species list, and any additions we can make to the volunteer program. So all of our survey methods ended up rating each tree's condition on a scale of poor to fair to excellent, or 1 to 3, or it was marked as missing. The exact words that were used on each survey were, again, slightly different, but they all broadly looked at things like the health of the bark, how full the foliage was, and whether there are any signs of significant pest damage or physical damage to the tree. So you can see these two trees on the left have very full green canopies, minimal leaf holes or discoloration, and they weren't found to have any damage to the bark, so they were given scores of excellent, or 3 out of 3. And then these trees on the right are both showing some significant dieback of the canopy, both with leaves and branches, and the tree that still has leaves is experiencing a lot of wilting and discoloration, generally just struggling a lot, so they have ratings of poor, or 1 out of 3. These indicators were categorized into checklists that all weighed differently into the overall condition rating of the tree, but that's just kind of a quick overview of what we were looking for in these assessments of the conditions of these trees. So now we'll move on to the results of these surveys, starting with the 1 year post-planting data, which again was the monitoring data gathered last summer on all of the 99 trees that were planted in 2023. So of these trees, we found that 91% of them were in fair to excellent condition, and there was just one tree that was dead. It was a Helena maple. It looked like it had probably been underwatered and may have been suffering from a blight-like disease, just based on what we observed from the severe dieback of the crown. And this bar chart on the right is showing the average rating for each species on a scale of 1 to 3, poor to fair to excellent. We can see that honey locusts were the species with the highest average rating of 2.9, which was almost all excellent condition trees. And then the lowest rated species was the Japanese tree lilac, which earned a 1.9, sitting just below the fair rating. Okay, now we'll move into looking at the data that I collected this summer on the 65 trees that were planted in 2022. So 95% of these trees were in fair to excellent condition. 2 of them were missing, so they were either removed from the planting site or maybe died, or they could have just been placed at a different address from what we had written down on our list. 3 species had average ratings of excellent across all of the individuals that were surveyed, and these were the Helena maple, American elm, and starlight crabapple. And the Japanese tree lilac was the lowest with an average of 2.3, so sitting still pretty comfortably in the fair category. The Japanese tree lilac was still the lowest, but we're seeing shifts in the highest ranking species. The American elm was ranked towards the lower end of all species 1 year post-planting, but it seems to be faring quite a bit better a longer time after planting. And lindens also went from 2.3 1 year after planting to a 2.8 3 years after planting. And there are several reasons why we might be seeing this. It could just be that these trees were planted and surveyed in different years during different conditions by different people. Or it could be that they tend to struggle during that first year after being planted and then just take a second to thrive. But yeah, it was interesting to see how certain species had such variable results between years. So this slide is showing a combination of all of the data that was collected this summer, which includes the surveys that I conducted on all of the trees planted in 2022, as well as the health checks that volunteers completed on almost all of the trees that were planted from 2023 to 2025. Again, they were able to crank through 264 of those trees, which is incredible in itself. So this is showing the condition of 329 trees out of the 381 total trees that have been planted as of this summer. So 96% of these trees were found to be in fair to excellent condition. Only 3 were missing or dead. And we pulled 4 of the most common concerns or reasons why a tree would be in poor condition here in this bar graph. Most common, which is something people might not realize is a thing that can harm their tree, is when it's surrounded by weeds or grasses. So a tree that's surrounded by weeds or grasses is having to compete with this other vegetation for water. So even if you, as a tree adopter, are watering the tree sufficiently, it's not taking up all of that water and it still could be suffering from a certain level of drought stress. So this is related to another common concern we saw in around a third of trees, which was dry soil. Um, then around 15% of trees had either discolored or wilting leaves, which is an early sign of drought stress or underwatering. I also thought it was important to note that almost half the trees had some sort of pruning need, whether it was rubbing branches or diving branches or competing leaders. This isn't necessarily a vital immediate concern, but it provides us with some insight into what our next steps as a program might need to address just to prevent this from becoming a more vital concern in the future. Um, 3 species technically had perfect ratings across all these surveys, with all trees receiving excellent ratings, and these were starlight crabapple, autumn blaze maple, and prairie splendor maple. But all of them had 5 or less individuals surveyed in total, which is significantly less than almost every other species that we've planted. Lindens, for example, had 43 trees surveyed, and they had the next highest average rating of 2.8, which is why they're listed as the highest ranking species here. Um, so most species had over 25 trees surveyed. So the 3 perfect ratings kind of came from outliers in that sense. And they weren't excluded from surveys. They were just only planted through the program for 1 year. So they really just had fewer individuals to survey altogether. Um, and again, the lowest ranking species was the Japanese tree lilac, but they were still sitting at a 2.3, just above a fair on average in terms of the poor, fair, excellent ratings. Okay, so I know I've been kind of going on about how Japanese tree lilacs are consistently the poorest ranking species, and a lot of the data is focusing on the concerns we're seeing and the bad things, but all in all, we're seeing very promising results and positive trends among these trees. So again, 96% of the surveyed trees are in fair to excellent condition, and less than 1% were missing or dead. So, because of this, we're seeing that Livingston Loves Trees has really been hugely successful in achieving all of its goals, not just in planting trees that are thriving, but also in communicating tree care needs to adopters and following up on struggling trees. Um, Not very many tree planting programs have a survival rate of over 99%. And the fact that Livingston Loves Trees does is kind of a testament to how important it is to do these follow-ups and outreach and watering reminders. And tree adopters themselves are caring for these trees really well and following through on their own commitment to caring for them. Um, so we're also seeing 94% of the surveyed trees had completely healthy and intact bark. 93% showed 0 signs of any harmful pests, and 84% had completely full and green foliage. We did see quite a few leaf holes, and I'm sure you see them when you're walking around town too, but we want to stress with that leaf holes aren't always a bad thing, and they can be a sign of a healthy tree that's attracting pollinators, or a healthy tree that's just being used as food for insects without them doing any real damage to the tree. A lot of adopters have come to us worried that their tree was being attacked by pests when really they had a perfectly healthy tree that either neutral or beneficial insects were just using as a resource. So now that we have all those numbers and stories, we need to make meaning out of them, and we can do that by considering some changes moving forward to Livingston Loves Trees as a program. And we can start with that by increasing education and outreach towards tree adopters. There are some insects, disturbances, and diseases that are important for tree adopters to be aware of so they can identify them early and stop them before they cause irreversible damage to their tree. And this is just a short list of some of the big ones. I'm not going to go in depth about these, but it's just an example of the more specific and detailed information that we want to be sure we're relaying to tree adopters in the future. But we are putting together a tree care guide with information on species-specific threats and maintenance tips that we're hoping to provide as a resource for tree adopters in the future. Um, and during the health check process, volunteers who spoke with tree adopters found that there's definitely a need for education on harmful insects versus non-harmful insects, and what constitutes a real emergency for a tree. Um, and MSU Extension is a great resource for this. So if there's any tree adopters here who have similar questions or concerns about your trees, they have some great experts who have helped other tree adopters identify issues and ease nerves about non-issues that their trees are experiencing. Right, so we focused a lot about indicators of poor health, but it's just as important to know what it looks like when your tree is perfectly healthy. So in addition to talking to tree adopters about negative signs to look out for, we want to highlight some of the indicators of good health, like recruitment of pollinators. Like I was just saying, there's a lot of instances of leaf holes that were not degrading the tree's health. Quite a few lindens had these large round holes in their leaves that were caused by leafcutter bees. And these don't harm the tree at all. They're actually very beneficial pollinators to have around, and they're signs of a healthy ecosystem. So other indicators of good health are new branch growth during the growing season, a full canopy with a single dominant leading branch, and observable height and circumference growth. We tend to have kind of a negativity bias where we only see what's wrong with a tree, but sometimes the most important indicator of a tree's health is just a lack of any significant injury. So the next element that we want to consider as a program is making some adjustments to the offered tree species list based on the overall ratings we gathered, as well as what we know about species that are adapted to our climate in Montana. So we want to promote species that are consistently in good health or that are showing these signs of good health, like recruitment of pollinators. So lindens, of course, are recruiting those leafcutter bees. They're also very well adapted to the local climate and soil type that we have. And bur oaks are also a great species for the area that we're in. They're native to Montana and they're tolerant to a lot of different weather and climate patterns. I want to reiterate, there really aren't any species that are doing poorly. And we're seeing through our data that it can take a few years for a tree to establish itself and thrive after it's been planted, like we saw with the elms, and we might be seeing with the Japanese tree lilacs. So we don't see a need to remove any species from our list, but we do want to keep increasing the diversity of our planting list to increase the urban forest resilience to threats like disease. There are so many instances of communities only planting a few species, and when they do that, these trees can get wiped out really easily by a disease or a pest outbreak, like we're seeing with ash trees and the emerald ash borer. So increasing diversity with species that are well adapted to our climate is really going to be key to preventing that and also increasing resilience. So the last program-related conclusion that we've drawn from this data is that we want to expand and continue our Livingston Loves Trees volunteer-based programs. For one, we found that nearly half of the trees surveyed need pruning, and it's best to prune trees in the first 2 to 5 years after planting to prevent the development of any issues that become really difficult and expensive to fix once the trees are large. So implementing a volunteer-based pruning program would mitigate these issues. We also want to continue monitoring the trees that were planted, especially in 2022, since we're seeing variation in how well certain species are doing immediately after planting versus 3 years after planting. Gathering more of this species level data is going to help us determine whether these species are struggling or if they just need time to really establish themselves. Finally, we were able to engage with tree adopters on a much more personal level about their tree's health this year, entirely thanks to the passion of volunteers. Some of the volunteers set up sort of a triage system for the trees that were struggling the most, and they individually reached out to their tree adopters. We'll hear about that a little bit more from Lita here in a minute. But continuing this system they coordinated in the future is really going to take health checks to the next level, drive up the level of community engagement and tree awareness, both with Livingston Loves Trees and people's care for their own trees. All right, so I want to briefly touch on the amazing volunteer work that was done, and then we'll hear from Lita about her experience as a volunteer. So within this summer's health check program, we were able to work with 10 volunteers who put in around 40 hours of work training, observing 264 trees and connecting the community to one another through these trees in a way that we really can't even quantify. We've heard stories of Livingston Loves Trees tree adopters sharing what they've learned about tree care from those little health check scorecards with their neighbors who aren't tree adopters. And this is just kind of creating like a ripple effect of tree awareness throughout the excuse me, throughout the community. And that was really just the ideal scenario for this whole program, like not just helping our own trees, but helping all of the trees, and connecting people to each other in that process. So again, that personal impact was only possible because of the passion of volunteers, and one volunteer, Lita, is going to talk a little bit about her experience. She was really great spearheading that triage system that I mentioned earlier and connecting with the tree adopters to help their struggling trees. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lita.
Am I on now? Do you hear me, Sarah? Okay, everybody hears me? Great. Hi, I'm Edleeta Shands, and I've volunteered because my family loves trees. And with that, everyone has sort of really stated what the my experience has been on sort of like I could say boots on the ground kind of thing, right? One of the thing about the that I wanted to focus on is the community and shared values that the tree project has really brought us. It's also brought us this feeling of unity around something that's very nonpartisan, and something that also I want to focus on is the emotional benefits that of people who are involved in a group project in a community versus doing something individually. I think we all can plant a tree and be happy about that, but there's something much different happening with the community focus of the group planting of trees and outreaching to all of our neighbors, no matter who they are or what they believe or what they want for their children and families in the future. They all are joining together with this one unifying force of loving their tree. And the adopters want a tree because they love their tree, and they also love joining in on a group. We found like people are excited. They could have bought a tree, but they really wanted to be part of a project. I think that's real human nature of bringing us together. So there's all these interconnection things that are going to happen with trees. Provide us all the metaphors we need for a community healing, reaching out, rooting, branching. All those ideas can all be illustrated just by our one or 400 trees or 4,000 trees and expanding, which I found a lot of people that we went as I was as a tree nurse, which I had to let them know. I don't know. I'm just showing up and taking as vitals, but I can find people who do know. And that was exciting to people because I think that when you do something like this, they think they're in isolation, and they also feel totally responsible that I'm on my own and that I've failed or I succeeded, or what they were looking at, they didn't know. Like I was not tree aware. I've become tree aware, even though I grew up in this area. I didn't know what trees really needed. And then I also didn't know that when I was looking at a tree, that according to my standard, if it wasn't my childhood drawing of a nice little bushy tree, that it's still fine. And it has as much, there's diversity of variables, just like people. Not everyone has to be the same height, the same shape. And even though they may be the same species, just today or yesterday, I found out through this program of how wonderful it is to interconnect with Jackie at the MSU Extension. As I found the tree adopters are so excited to know that there is someone there to help. so they don't feel isolated and alone with their tree. Well, I called Jackie. I said, in front of PCEC's office, there's 3 honey locusts, and 2 of them have been yellowing sooner than the other green one. And so it's very disturbing to me, thinking that they've done something wrong, or it's the soil's wrong, or, immediately we go to the negative bias. Something's wrong. We're doing something wrong. The earth is wrong. Something's off. She said, I love Jackie. She says, oh, I'll drive by. I thought I'd just bring her a branch. She said, I'm in Billings right now, but as soon as I drive by, I'll let you know. And so she did. She buzzed by. And then she sent me a text and she said, oh, they all look wonderful. They're all great. They're not all exactly the same. They're all doing wonderfully for each. Those individual trees are functioning how they're supposed to. It was the same word that I got from her when I went with the Japanese lilac, that we all thought, oh no, it's dying. And as soon as I see it, because it doesn't look like my picture of a tree as a child. And then she said, oh, it's done everything it needs to do. And it doesn't have any problems that I can foresee in the past, present, or future. And I was like, oh, so this tree is fine, even though it doesn't have that its appearance. So it's really brought me into that kind of awareness that sometimes I'm like, it's like a new mother. Every time the baby burps or doesn't, or doesn't do something, you think like, oh, I've got to go to the doctor because something's wrong. Well, that's sort of my experience with trees. And I think with a lot of people, it's the same feeling. One of the experiences, those that we've been able to do, is help with people, with neighbors who would not connect with their neighbors for any other reason. But when we said, oh, we're tree nurses, this man came up. He says, oh, please, would you come look at my tree? And we went, oh, yes, we're happy to look at your tree. And I don't know that we would have had any other reason to communicate with this man in Livingston, except for he wanted help with his tree and he was ever so excited. And then, of course, now I'm going by to see how his tree is, just, driving by. And so we're all looking at each other's trees. It's really fun. It brings joy. I haven't found any of negativity that you find in some other projects or ideas in the community. So I think it's a good project for bringing people together and healing community divisions and bringing people into the things that are much needed, which is gratitude and joy and happiness, and seeing something that they can participate in, and it's not something separate from them that they're just reading about on Facebook or something. It's actually something they can drive around and start looking at the trees. And we did have to tell them that a lot of this is Livingston Loves Trees, not the city. We're not the city. And they said, well, the city told us to do that. And I said, well, we don't always agree with what the city's saying, but we're not here with the city. So we had to, it's just an awareness. They're just now, as the people who I'm communicating with are just now finding out there is this project. It's interesting to me. It's gone on for 3 or 4 years. And just now it's starting to really grow, just like rooting out and branching out. And we're finding that collaboration with neighbors and connecting with their services. They get so excited when they heard they could go to the extension office, and that's connecting them up with other things in their, not just their tree, but other plants and such in their yards, but everyone else's. And so they're able to help neighbors, able to help neighbor. And that's kind of a healthy community that I find is important. So it's a great project bringing us together. I'm on the learning curve, and I'll leave it at that. I think it's been wonderful to get this data and to go forth from this. And I will have to say that sometimes as a tree nurse, you do need to spend some time. It's not just talking about the tree. I've spent a lot of time learning about people's lives where, after a half an hour or something, I have to cut it short because I have to get to another tree. But we're doing more than just planting trees and looking at trees with people. We're talking about their lives, things that they're having struggles with. It goes beyond the project, is what I'm going to say. And I'm probably going to just say it's been a really special opportunity to be a part of this and to actually learn and grow. And I can finally join my husband, who knew more about trees than I did. And he's always been overcautious, and watering is our big issue. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lizzie. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lita. And I want to leave some time and actually just invite anybody else. If, Susan Regal, you've been instrumental in Livingston Loves Trees and really injecting a lot of energy and collaboration with PCEC. And, most people here have volunteered in some capacity with PCEC, including planting trees. So if anybody has any questions or if they want to tell a story or if they have anything to add, I would welcome you to come off mute and tell us a story or an anecdote or anything else that inspires you. With this program, it has involved kiddos, Montessori, middle school kids. The Green Initiative plants trees with us every year and even planted their own tree at the school this year as an initiative working with the school board, which has some hurdles. So they planted one tree, but it's thriving and it's a bur oak and it's doing really well. And just some of these other photos, just kind of show like some of the training. We work with local businesses. It was a big importance for the original founders of this program to ensure that local nurseries and landscape architects and a diverse group of local businesses were all providing input and having an opportunity. So you can see there some of the trainings that were happening on how to plant a tree, so that we're making sure that we're giving them their best shot, because it's easy to plant a tree, but you can plant it too deep or you can mess with the roots. And that has been instrumental in our own tree knowledge, as well as leaning on MSU Extension and everybody else. So does anybody want to ask any questions or provide a story or say something? I won't put you on the spot. You'll have to volunteer yourself. I see
Hey, Sarah,
you.
this is Gavin. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, Gavin, go ahead.
Oh, I received two trees this year, and they are so beautiful. And as I grew up, my dad's a landscaper, and we've been working with trees forever. And so inherently, I have a love for trees. But as I'm telling my friends and folks about this all over the country, because I'm so proud of my two trees, people are really amazed and just blown away that this actually happens. And now to see all of the data behind it and the work that's going in post planting is really, really impressive. And um, I'm not sure exactly who funds this whole thing. Probably a combination of a lot of things, but this is amazing work, and I'm just so proud to have this in our community. So thank you.
Mm. Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, I think when some of the folks were looking at other tree programs across the nation, and bigger cities have a goal of planting like 20 trees a year, and they're co-funded. So what's unique, many things are unique about Livingston Loves Trees, and maybe it's a culture of Livingston and Park County that we just go over and above and beyond. And with the goal of 100 is quite shocking to a lot of people, and that we managed to give away 100 trees. Um, there is a lot of funders in trees, but it is difficult to fund the long-term maintenance and work that goes into this. So we're hoping to grow that more and substantiate, the value of them, and that they go so much deeper than just the tree itself. So thank you for saying that. Anybody else? Susan, I saw you, I think, come off mute.
Hi. I just wanted to say it was an excellent report. It was an exciting report to hear because you guys are doing amazing work and it's just growing, and the quality of the data is, that's something that we dabbled in early on, but it never anything like this that's so concrete and we can really see what's going on. So Lizzie and everyone who's involved in that, thank you so much. And I was just thinking when you guys were talking before, that when we started the program, we had like these discussions about, okay, how many trees are we going to try to plant? And it was like, well, do you think we could plant 25 trees? So to say that it's been successful is to understate, and it's thanks to all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to quickly say thank you, Lizzie. That was a great presentation, and Lita, I loved your testimony, and Sarah for leading us off. But I know, and I love watching this program and being a part of it when I can. But I was thinking about this during the presentation. Are there trees that are more popular with people? Do you get requests for certain types? Is there like a demand for certain trees, and how do you balance that out and try to, spread out the trees and throughout the neighborhood so that you're not creating those little islands of monocultures?
I mean, I'll answer the best I can, and then I really invite other people, because I haven't been involved in that process. In the origin story, the beginning, the team and the tree buds really tried to allow people to pick their own species. And I think for the first 2 years, they did a really good job, and every single person that requested that species got that species. And we weren't to a point yet where we were saturated because of the lack of species that we were providing, that there wasn't a risk of monoculture in those neighborhoods. And just how they were plotted out and prioritize different neighborhoods. And, you have to also remember that these volunteers are on the ground every season before we go planting, and they're hanging out door hangers, and they're selecting neighborhoods, and they're knocking on doors, and, trying to talk about the program and get people to request trees. So some of the other things that go into those trees, well, to take it back one more step, is that we don't promise the species anymore, just because we are becoming more saturated, and there's other limiting factors such as overhead lines or distance to other trees. We want to be really cognizant of tree spacing. A bur oak is going to get pretty big, although it takes a really long time, or some of the larger maples. So we try to provide a selection of different trees, like the Japanese lilac is our smallest tree, and then a hawthorn, Tartarian maples. You start to kind of climb up the size and scale factor. And our tree buds do an awesome job of really, identifying the location and what would be a suggested most suitable tree species that we've ordered. You can imagine how this starts to become quite a logistical operational process, especially as we're doing the tree order before we're doing the planting season. And how many adopters we understand we're going to get. So there's a lot of work on the back end. And then this work and the monitoring and health checks are really going to help us identify what species are doing well, and even being able to look at what neighborhoods. So the Southeast neighborhood tends to have sandier, more rocky soils because they're in that floodplain. And so we're really starting to look at the ecological diversity of the habitat that we're putting the tree in. And then just also looking at other trees in the area to make sure that we're not putting like an elm, which requires a lot more water, in a relatively, dry, sandy soiled area. So we might want to put a chokecherry or something else that is a little bit more hardy. And then especially on the north side too, Japanese lilacs might be a little more sensitive to wind, but a chokecherry might really thrive. And then to answer your question, Max, too, about our most requests, people love maples. I think also because they're really hardy. The bur oaks they're growing in popularity, but they're kind of a Dr. Seuss tree. So that awareness of what an incredible tree they are is growing. Some people do request a lot of Japanese lilacs. I think they like the flowering component. And either people have mixed feelings about snow crabs or spring snow crabs or just crab apples. We usually plant a non-fruit bearing tree that flowers, but it won't produce a lot of fruit because it's on our boulevards. So people either love them or they absolutely don't want them. So it's like, I absolutely want a snow crab, or I do not want, I do not want a crab apple. So yeah, it's kind of variety, and it surprises me every year that people have a different affinity, I guess, like what kind of dog you might like is the same kind of like what kind of tree. And some people don't care at all. They'll just take any tree because they love them all. Does anybody else want to add any other of what kind of thought goes into that? Okay.
That was great. Great detail. Thank you.
Yeah. And I've learned so much about trees. I was even identifying trees. And if you get involved in just one planting season, and we have about 10 to 15 different species that you learn about those trees just by being around the nursery providers, the folks that are planting trees, and the experts. And it's just such a gift to be able to absorb and be in a living classroom with those folks. All right, anything else from anyone? I'm just going to wrap up then, and then we can leave a little bit early. The hearing's going to start in 10 minutes. And so I will also let you all go back to your lives. Just a couple quick things that we touched on in the presentation about what's next. And Lizzie is ending her term, unfortunately, and we're really sad to see her go. She's provided immense amount of information and resources, and I could see like the work and the training volunteers, and really provided a catalyst for us to jump forward and to continue the health checks and the monitoring and elevating the program. So we are going to have a community conversation on trees with MSU Extension specifically, and Jackie, who has been a wealth of information and passion, the carpenter bees, and really helping us identify like what is an issue and what's not an issue, and then some of the ecological benefits of each of those species, which will inform a tree care and info booklet per species. Lizzie was talking about that. So we can pull that information about trees from different apps and resources, but how is it really specific to Livingston and our climate? So it'll be a little bit more nuanced that adopters can have. And then with the city of Livingston, we hosted a pruning course, and another partner is Townsend Tree Board, and they have a tree program, and they've done over 100 and 800 and I think 40 or 50 trees. I found an old flyer in our files. It was like hand typed and written and hand drawn with their adopter program, and we've really leaned on them for their experience. And Patrick comes and does a pruning training, and he makes you love pruning. And so we'll invite all of our adopters to that. It is the most important to, do pruning early on, just because a 10-minute prune saves you hundreds of dollars later on, and up to thousands of dollars, and liability and everything else. So that's a big focus of ours. And then really just making sure we're focusing on the tree desert. So the city of Livingston has been a partner, a funding partner, and as well as with the parks maintenance folks, and that relationship and collaboration is growing, and we're starting to have conversations of how do we prioritize areas where you have 2 or 3 blocks that are missing trees, and how can we overlay that with trails and bike pathways and schools. And then now to go back to my introduction, like hearing Lori Byron talk about how protecting the health of our communities and our kids by providing more trees and barriers to car emissions, vehicle emissions, and coal trains is just an added motivation of where we're prioritizing areas. And then we're continuing to build on the tree resource library online, and we can share that. And it's just, maintenance and local conditions and different tree species. And there's some fun things on there about trees that we found that are really helpful. And then you can always sign up to volunteer, more volunteering opportunities, including the pruning, adopt a tree, get your friends to adopt a tree. And then we have not fully funded the program, so any donation also helps with that too. And then of course, I've listed some of these folks, but City of Livingston, Parks Maintenance, the MSU Extension, MCC and AmeriCorps for many years, Townsend Tree Board, school children, kids, the volunteers, landscape architects, nurseries, DNRC, foundations, and more have helped us do what we've done today. So thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. And thanks for your love for trees. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.